Today, we're speaking with Corbett Barr, indie entrepreneur, content marketer, and software developer, founder of Fizzle and Palapa, host of the incredibly popular Fizzle show, home for entrepreneurs online everywhere. Very excited about this conversation. Corbett has a FI story here, and he's done it multiple times. In many cases, this indie entrepreneur opportunity, this aspect of building a business online that has frankly never been easier than it is right now in the year 2020 and beyond. He was forging this path when honestly it was hard. It was really hard. You had to have someone basically give you permission in the early 2000s to do kind of the types of stuff that we're all talking about right now. You had to have someone. It was just, there was a lot more friction. But what we're going to be able to get the chance to do is go back, take a look at Corbett's origin story, what got him off the ledge and gave him the hope that maybe entrepreneurship was for him. And where has that, what can we actually learn from his story? I'm fascinated by this conversation, and to help me with this, I have my co-host Brad here with me today. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Jonathan, I am doing quite well. And yeah, you're right. Corbett's story has a little bit of everything, right? Like he is one of the original internet entrepreneurs going back to 2005. But it wasn't always, hey, let's be an indie entrepreneur. Let's have lifestyle design and digital nomadism. There were bumps in the path. There was a time where his company took venture capital money. And I'm just curious to really dive into this entire journey and talk through the lessons he's learned, what he's taken away, and where his FI journey goes from here. So Corbett, with that, welcome to ChooseFI.
Thank you, Brad, Jonathan, both of you. Really honored to be on today.
Well, we're honored to have you, man. I mean, as both of us from our background, we don't have a background in tech. We don't have a background in podcasting. We don't have a background in any of the, but I think the interesting thing is at some point, nobody does. At some point you decide as an indie entrepreneur, you just have to decide to get started and you got to kind of leave that imposter syndrome behind. And now, our story, we're going to be looking at your life through the lens of someone that has leaned into it over the last 15 years and built not just one incredible thing, but multiple incredible products and offerings and a following that is coming with them on every additional thing that you tackle. There is a lot to glean from this, but where I really wanted to start with all that is, now you're Corbett Barr, indie entrepreneur and the host of the Fizzle show, a very well-known entity in the entrepreneur space. But in 2005, you weren't. You were just a guy that was probably deciding to try his hand at entrepreneurship. And I remember that moment for me in a much more recent memory. What did that look like for you?
It was scary. I had built this version of myself in my mind that was, at the time, I was a consultant working in big Fortune 500 companies. And this was the kind of job that a lot of people really wanted to have and that you could build a whole career around. And, work hard, save your money, and eventually, hopefully have enough to retire comfortably, maybe somewhat early. This was long before I was aware of financial independence or FI as a topic. And it was before I had really considered entrepreneurship as an option. But I knew I had this sense that I didn't want to climb a ladder my entire career only to feel at the end like maybe the ladder was leaned against the wrong wall. And there was something that kind of kept nudging me towards being interested in and following entrepreneurship as a topic. So in those years, 2005, I knew I wasn't happy with my career. I knew that I wasn't wanting to be a consultant my whole life, but I was scared to take the leap. And luckily for me, a friend who I had known for quite a while, who had had some success at business in the past, asked if I wanted to get involved in a new project. And one thing led to another. I ended up being a co-founder in a project with him. But that didn't mean I didn't have to go through the whole mental exercise of thinking about what it would be to leave my job and my salary behind, and whether or not I had the guts to spend some of my own savings trying to get that business off the ground.
Corbett, what did your financial life look like at that point to be able to take that leap? I assume, going back 2005, right? Like it's one thing to go out on your own in 2020 when it's still, for some people view it as risky, right? And their family and friends try to talk them out of it in 2020. But 2005, right? Like this is a whole different thing. Like what did your finances look like? And I guess the second part of that question is, what on earth did your family and friends think about this?
Well, I hate talking about things that happened 15 or 20 years ago because it makes me feel a little old. But bear with me for a second, because before 2005, I learned a really painful lesson. And this is something that maybe some people are learning right now during this crisis that we're going through. In 2000 and 2001, we had a massive financial crisis. And I found myself furloughed from one of my very early jobs. I was maybe 23 at the time, something like that. But during that furlough, when they cut my salary and were hoping that I would be able to come back 6 months later, I remember being thrown into essentially a paycheck to paycheck situation and realizing that I might not make it more than a couple of months. In fact, I had to go and get some side project work to help keep me afloat. And that was a terrible feeling. I remember just being like gripped with this financial burden hanging over me, feeling like ashamed and like I was going to have to tell my wife that, I don't know, maybe we'll have to move. I don't know what the next step would be. But I learned that lesson hard and luckily at a very early age. So after that, I focused on just saving as much as possible. We bought some good real estate. I saved everything I could. So then by the time I was considering entrepreneurship, I had enough of a financial cushion that I could last maybe a year or so while I was getting this thing off the ground. So it was a gamble, but I figured worst case scenario, I would go back to a job again and I wouldn't have the savings anymore, but at least I would know whether or not I had what it took to at least try entrepreneurship to see if it was right for me.
So let's talk about this first step as entrepreneurship. What was the project? Was it just an unmitigated success? Like you were just a runaway success train?
I wish. I wish. No, this was before podcasting. This was before, an individual building like a massive blog or email list or something. This was in the years where the examples we had were big venture capital backed startups. And in that world, I thought that you had to basically work yourself to the bone, sleep under your desk, and try to hit a home run so that eventually you would have a bunch of money and then you could go do what you wanted with your life. And what that means is I left a consulting job only to find myself in a situation where I had a board of directors, a co-founder, employees, advisors, venture capitalists, all of these different people expecting things from me and needing things from me. And so I ended up feeling even more trapped than I had as an employee. But on top of that, I had to grapple a few years later with the fact that this wasn't going to be a home run. And so I went through this, the gauntlet only to come out the end with not much to show for it. And that was a real painful kind of wake up call that you could put all this time and effort and money into something and basically be back where you were at the beginning, maybe with more skills and knowledge and experience, but with less money to try the next time.
Yeah. So in some ways it was kind of your worst case scenario. You mapped out what's the worst that could happen. And you said, well, I just have to go back potentially and get another job and all my money will be gone. So in 2009, you're in that reflection place. All right. Do I go back to work because I'm out of money? And this has been, were you having those internal conversations? Look how easy my life was when I was an employee in 2009.
Not exactly, because, once you get a taste of entrepreneurship and the possibility and just feeling what it's like to helm a ship, it is hard to imagine going back. So, and it's funny, we're talking today during this, 2020 financial and health crisis that we're going through, because I feel like a lot of things have happened in my life during crises. And the startup ended up basically crumbling because of the 2008 financial collapse that happened. It was impossible to raise money from venture capitalists at that time. So instead of just jumping into the next thing, because the next thing wasn't exactly apparent to me, I decided to really hit the reset button. And that's that marked a massive pivot because my wife and I took what ended up becoming an 8-month-long sabbatical. We packed up our car and drove south into Mexico with our dog and basically just explored around to give ourselves, myself especially, enough time away from what I had been doing to clear my head and really imagine what I wanted my life to be from that point forward.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'd love to actually dive into that. So, I mean, what did those, I assume you had real in-depth conversations with your wife about like, what does our future look like? We were on this standard path as a consultant. Then I did this entrepreneurship with venture capital and all this stuff. Where do we go now? Like, what did you guys, what did those, maybe even the process, like, what did those conversations look like? How did you design a life that you actually wanted to live into, as opposed to what you're describing here of like being even more trapped, right? Like you were an entrepreneur, but you were even more trapped because the board, these investors, they were overseeing you, and compounded, there's more stress and uncertainty. So talk me through like how you guys as a team move forward from there.
Yeah, and Brad, you had asked earlier about what my friends and family thought of this whole thing. And it's interesting when you think about the influences that are around you when you try to do something different. I had all the usual kind of responses. People thought I was crazy for leaving my job and so on. And then, of course, when we took our sabbatical, people were, I think, a little jealous of us taking time off, but they were also a little concerned, like what the heck were we doing? But at the same time, aside from friends and family, the other influences in my life at that time, we were living in San Francisco. We had been for those years. And the influences were really this heavy venture capital sort of startup mentality. And it took going to Mexico to get away from all of those influences, friends, family, and just the culture of entrepreneurship that I had been steeped in, to see that something else might be possible. This was around the time that I discovered the concepts of location independence, lifestyle design, digital nomading. Tim Ferriss had written a book in 2008, The 4-Hour Work Week. There started to be various blogs around these topics. And I ended up starting a blog on that trip, basically to chronicle our adventure, but also just to ask myself questions out loud about the nature of life and career and the relationship between the two, and why most of us put our career first and sacrifice our lives during some of the best years that we'll ever have in terms of physical and mental ability and so on. And so I started to wonder what I had wanted entrepreneurship for in the first place. And as I examined that deeper, I started to realize that there were various lifestyle things that I wanted to achieve that maybe didn't require being wealthy. Maybe it just required me having enough time and control to do the things that I wanted, to be able to travel, spend time working on things that I wanted to work on, spend time with my friends and family and so on. And starting that blog and asking those questions really just took me in a whole different direction in terms of entrepreneurship.
It's interesting. You're an entrepreneur and you love entrepreneurship. It's halfway, it's your identity. It's just something that lights you up. You love talking about all aspects of it. You love exploring it. But in that last sentence, you said the culture of entrepreneurship. And it was very clear to me that in that sentence explicitly, there was a negative connotation. It was dragging you down in that sentence. So you love entrepreneurship, but the culture of entrepreneurship in that sentence was a little bit toxic for you. So I'm curious, as a lifelong entrepreneur, as someone that cultivates a following of entrepreneurs, that helps people be better entrepreneurs, what is the dark side of that? And also for you, what still gets you so excited about it? What's the unique opportunity there?
Yeah, and this is something that I've learned the hard way, and I've seen a lot of people struggle with. There are different ways to build businesses, and you can put an enormous amount of pressure on yourself that can end up becoming counterproductive or even destructive. If you obsess and basically to the detriment of your health, especially your mental health, you can obsess about your success and the success that other people are having. And you can really put yourself in a corner that can be difficult to get out from. I think there's a much healthier way to go about it. I think this is much more common today. But again, that culture of Silicon Valley entrepreneurship that you've probably seen on TV shows and maybe you've heard stories about, it works for some people. And that's where you hear about these unicorn stories where people build billion-dollar businesses. But you don't hear about the path of destruction that it leaves in a lot of people's lives. And that's why I'm so happy that entrepreneurship has become democratized over the past 10 to 15 years. I mean, look, right now, we're talking over Skype on a podcast that's going out to thousands upon thousands of listeners. And this wasn't possible just 10 years ago. And now, two guys with a dream can start something that affects so many people. And so, because that's possible, and because you don't have to take investment money, you don't have to have big name advisors and so on, you can really be in control not only of what you do, but of how you do it. And that's so important to think about when you become an entrepreneur, because it's very easy to alienate your family, your friends, to like I said, put yourself into a very tough situation that can be hard to dig out from. So think about how you want to go about what you're doing, not just what it is that you're planning to build.
Yeah, I love that, Corbett. And going back to kind of that destructive concept of this one type of entrepreneurship, right? It's like, to your point, it's growth at all costs. It's getting that big exit, right? As if that's the only way for success, right? Like, it reminds me of, most people think the only way to success is a standard job, right? It's equally as insidious in their own way, as if one path is the only possible way to a successful life. And I think that's what we in the FI community, we've opened this up, right? Like, in this case, for entrepreneurship, a lifestyle business is quite all right. Like, that can be a huge success for, as you said before, the decades you have on this planet to spend them how you want, right? Like, that to me is what's important about life. Like, how do I want to spend my precious time? And so much of this is this keeping up with the Joneses, right? Like, with the entrepreneurship, like, who do you have to prove something to? Like, you don't need to grow X% to prove something if your business is making enough money for you to have a wonderful life. And I think it's reimagining what success is ultimately. And I guess that's where I'm curious from here is, so it's 2009, you're in Mexico and you're designing a life with your wife. And what did your lifestyle business, like, what did this future business that was fledgling at that point, like, where did you go from there?
Well, the other critical lesson that I learned at the time was that I had imagined for myself that I was going to develop some sort of a product again, probably a software product, and then go out and find people who wanted it. And this is what we had done with the previous startup. I just thought that I would go about it in a different way so that there wasn't as much pressure on me. But through starting that blog that I mentioned, I started to realize that instead of building a product and then going to look for people who might want it, maybe I could find the people who wanted something first and then decide what to build for them. So this idea of an audience-based business or an audience-first business came to me just naturally. But since then, I've seen it happen thousands of times to people. In fact, a lot of people these days start by building an audience, whether on social media or email or blogging or podcasting or YouTube. And once they have attention from a lot of people, it's easy, especially if you've chosen a topic or a journey that you're helping those people go on. It's easy to find out how you can help them in a deeper way and then build products there. And to me, that ends up taking a lot of the risk out of things, because the worst thing you can do as an entrepreneur is to spend many months or years building something only to find out that nobody really wants it or no one will pay for it. So by building a business audience first, you reduce a lot of that risk.
If you build it, will they come? I don't know. We'll find out.
But so, I mean, to that point though, Corbett, like, what are you building the audience around? Like, are you building it around just random articles you're writing? Are you building it around a certain topic? Like how did you go about this? And then I guess how would you recommend someone today build this audience first business?
Yeah, great question. I would advise people to do exactly what you two have done. And not to say to build something in the financial independence space, but to choose a topic that people are interested in and that there's some momentum behind. In my case, as I mentioned at the time, this was after a big financial collapse. A lot of people were out of work. A lot of people were sitting there looking at their so called career, realizing that it had crumbled around them and wondering, well, how can I get some more safety and security? Or if safety and security isn't a thing, maybe I should be doing something that will allow me to live a lifestyle that I want at least. And so I jumped onto those topics of, again, location independence, digital nomading, and lifestyle design. And I spent my first year writing about those, interviewing people who were doing those things, finding out how people who were location independent or who were digital nomads were able to do it. And today I think we're starting to take some of this for granted because a lot of us are working at home. Even people that are in big corporate jobs are now working at home. But 10 years ago, it wasn't very common. And so that was a topic at the time that was gathering momentum. So if you look around, there are topics today that are gathering momentum, and jumping into something that you are interested in, that maybe you have some experience in or could become good at, and that there is building attention around in the zeitgeist. Those are good topics to jump on. And in the beginning stages of entrepreneurship, it's all about figuring out what your topic is or what you're going to be building towards. And a lot of times that can take some soul searching and some experimentation, and it doesn't necessarily just come to you overnight.
So I want to tee this up because you've mentioned a couple times. I just want to point out some of these big lessons because I'm sure they're sitting with you in 2009 as you go into this next chapter. One, you realized you didn't need a home run. You didn't need to create your own dream business that you were working in 80 hours a week. That didn't sound like freedom to you. And two, what you're really interested in going into 2009 was this idea of building a lifestyle for yourself that would allow you to put your energy and your talents into something that you enjoyed, but you wouldn't create a new prison cell for yourself. You want to create a lifestyle business. To me, that sounds like it's going to require knowing what it is that you want and knowing what it is that you value and probably having to make some choices. There's a trade-off here. So, but you need to know how much your life actually cost and kind of make sure you don't end up on this runaway hedonic treadmill that a lot of entrepreneurs fall trapped to. And I'm just curious, what was your experience 2009, maybe over the last decade? What's this intersection of fiscal prudence plus entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I love this. And we teach something inside of Fizzle we call your minimum viable income. And this is basically the sort of cut back all the fat, maybe think outside the box, imagine, paring back some things that you didn't think you could. But what's that number that can at least keep you afloat? And then think about your business in those terms. And for me, I was sort of forced to go back into my budget because here I was again living without an income, right? We were on this sabbatical and I had to really dive into the numbers. My wife and I were living in San Francisco, and you can imagine the rent's pretty expensive there. And we decided to approach our landlord at the time with our plan to go on a sabbatical and ask her about subletting our place. And bless her heart, she let us do it. And, we never imagined that would be possible, but we had a nice dinner with her. We explained what we were trying to do, and she let us sublet our place. Get that rent off of our plate for a while. For those 8 months we were in Mexico, and then living down there can be a lot cheaper than it is to live in the States. So we did all these things to pare back. And in thinking now about financial independence and learning from you guys and others, the way that you look at things and the way that you approach trying to gain financial independence, I just recognize that entrepreneurship can be so powerful for people, even if you decide to continue working in a career. But for people who really know the numbers and have that spreadsheet that they look at every week or every month or whatever, and they know what the numbers mean to them, and maybe you have a little scenario generator, if you were able to add just $1,000 or $2,000 a month from a side project, that could change your whole trajectory in terms of FI. And if that side project starts to take off and do well, great. I decided in most cases to just take the plunge and jump with both feet. But I can tell you that it is scary and distracting to live without an income, period. And I wasn't even thinking about what that was doing to my FI picture because I wasn't even aware of what that was. I was thinking more just about what I needed every month to survive. But it can be, especially as you watch your savings dwindle and you realize that you're getting closer and closer to the point where you don't have enough to continue on. And then you have to have that hard conversation with yourself about getting a job again or whatever that is. That can really influence your thinking. And so this other approach of building something on the side and then kind of seeing where it goes, that can be a great option for people as well. And I think a lot more people are doing that these days.
Yeah, and Corbett, what's so interesting is that that other path is the path that I took, the side project, right? Kind of proving out. So I was a kind of just middle of the road tax manager doing, I mean, literally corporate state tax returns, if you could imagine something as awful as that. And I just started a website. I had read Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek. I knew a friend who had a drop shipping site for printer ink cartridges at the time. And I just got started and I picked up these skills. And it ultimately, a couple of failures after, it ultimately led to me starting my little Richmond Savers website where I was making that little bit of money, but I proved out that this could work. I proved out to myself, at least, hey, if I could work on this for 40 hours a week or more, who knows, I could make something of this. Maybe I could figure out ways to scale it. And then you're constantly putting things together. We call it the talent stack here at ChooseFI. It's like these little dots that you can connect from various parts of your life. And it's neat that you and I have no means been on this journey anywhere near as long as you, but 7-10 years is not all that short of a time. And we've taken completely different paths. But your point about building that audience first, right? Like that's what I did. I proved this out. And to everybody out there, like you have to figure out what works for you. I think that's probably what we would all advise, right? Is like at the end of the day, your comfort level is critical with, do you jump in with both feet or do you test the waters?
And for people listening to this, I know, if again, you're the kind of person that's interested in FI and the principles behind it, you're probably somewhat conservative when it comes to your finances and being safe about things. And if you're going to approach entrepreneurship, you need to realize that there is a high chance of failure of at least one of the things that you try. That doesn't mean that you're a failure as an entrepreneur. All of us, or most of us at least, who become entrepreneurs have dozens of ideas that we started and didn't go anywhere, or maybe we got deep into it and then they blew up in our faces. That happens. So as part of your planning, if you're going to have a couple of failures, it might make sense to let those failures be on a smaller scale to begin with so that you're not setting yourself back by 5 years or whatever it might be.
Corbett, as you're talking and as I become more and more familiar with your backstory, I one thing that becomes apparent is if you look at entrepreneurship through this lifestyle lens, through this idea of building a life that you would never want to run away from, it starts to feel a lot more just like FI. It's like where you get your cake and eat it too. And I only say this to say that you've done this article and we'll have it linked up, but it's 27 things about working for yourself. We're not going to work through all 27 of them, but I just want to pull a couple out that really stood out to me. A couple observations that I have noted. And you even said it earlier, like once you get the taste of entrepreneurship done the right way, they couldn't pay you to go back. There's no way you would ever go back. And so I just want to tee you up and have this to react to it. Let's start with the dark side. You have no one to blame but yourself when you work for yourself. Does that hold true even now?
So true. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could try to blame the market or something, but you're only doing yourself a disservice if you're not admitting that you are where you are because of the decisions that you made.
Yeah, this is so incredibly true. I see this on a day-to-day basis myself. And pretty much any entrepreneur can look at this and say, all right, there are inputs that I'm putting into this business. I know what my goals are. I know what the plans are. Am I going to convert on this? Am I going to put in the time that's necessary? Right? Like if I'm not doing it, it's not getting done. Right? So the proof is in the pudding and it's on you. And that you could look at that. Some people might look at that as a negative thing. I look at that as a huge positive. It's
Mhm.
this is on me. And that, I mean, just to have that level of control feels great. It truly does.
All right, here's another one for you. You don't have to worry about getting a new boss who's a jerk.
But yeah, because you might be a jerk yourself. You never know. But I mean, how many times in your careers, or maybe people listening to this, thought that things were going really well at their job, and then their boss was replaced, and it just made their lives painful from that point forward.
All right, we got vacation time is nearly unlimited, and you decide when you work and when you don't, as we talked about, and where you work, right? Which I think is a lot of this digital nomadism. And I'd love for you to really talk about how you've utilized that to such great degree.
Yeah, I guess we didn't talk about it, but since that first sabbatical that my wife and I took back in 2009, we have returned to Mexico every winter since. And that's all while running various businesses. And, the internet can be challenging in some parts of the world. It's gotten a lot better over the past 10 years. But basically, as long as you have a decent connection and a place to park your laptop, you can work from anywhere. And we've spent a lot of time in Europe and traveled the world basically. And these are things that I think in my mind, originally, I thought I might not be able to do until I was quote unquote retired. But because I run my own business and I get to set my own schedule and decide where and when I work, we've been able to do all of that stuff. And, it doesn't mean that it's always super glamorous working from a hotel room in some other country. But once you close your laptop, you're out there exploring a new city, which is pretty amazing.
I think that's interesting. You're talking about your environment and controlling your environment, but there's so many other tertiary aspects. Like you're not having to sit through endless, pointless, actionless meetings where everybody's going through the actual protocol for how to ask their question in the appropriate timeline. There's no cubicles left. They're all gone. You put this on your list. The coffee is amazing.
Just finished some really good coffee.
Oh, nice. Man.
That's awesome. And Corbett, I know you're steeped in the FI world, and you talked before about minimum viable income, which I did want to come back to generally, and now's the perfect time. Like if you were thinking about your life, I mean, do you have a home base here in the US? Do you have like different budgets potentially, or FI numbers based on, hey, we could just travel all year round, or hey, we could live in Mexico all year round? Like, have you thought through those different scenarios?
Yeah, we have, and I'll say that my wife and I, we very much consider where we live our home base. We consider the costs of that not just in the month to month, but also what happens when we're not here. Like who's in that space? Are we able to rent it out? And so on. And so for us, a big consideration and part of the budget is, well, if we're going to live somewhere else, if we're going to buy a new house or something, what is the total annual cost of that place, including any rent back that we might get from someone? And so, for example, we found that in San Francisco, whenever we traveled, we could rent our place out no problem. When we moved to Portland, Oregon, in the winters, when it's really rainy, we've had some months where we haven't had tenants here. And so that goes into the cost of living for us. And I think that's an important thing. If you want to be nomadic in some way, or if you want to be able to travel a lot, you need to consider whether you're going to be paying double rent, or if there's some way to be creative about it.
Corbett, when was the last time that you were worried about money?
I would say in 2009, after my first big startup collapsed, I was confronted with this idea of having to build something again from scratch, and you never know how long that's going to take. So you start figuring, okay, what's my minimum viable income? At the time, it was probably $5,000 a month or something was what I needed to cover in expenses. And then you figure out what your savings are and how long you can exist on that. And so you start doing the numbers, and you can get a little worried about it. I was definitely scared towards the end of that period before the income really started rolling in.
Well, let's talk maybe not so much about the income rolling in, but really the trajectory of this next thing. So from 2009, you did that burn rate calculation on that minimum viable income and basically said, I have this much time. And then the takeaway probably was either let's go get a job or let's get to work. It sounds like you picked let's get to work. What did you build? Like, I know Fizzle this is the conversation now. This is where your heart is, and this is what you're working on along with a couple other projects. But in 2009, Fizzle maybe wasn't even in your sphere of awareness, your zone of awareness. Well, what did you get started with?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I had been building an audience, and I knew that I wanted to sell something to them. So I tested the waters by putting out a couple of free ebooks. People really seemed to like those. These were on topics involving something known as affiliate marketing. And this was something that I had had some success with, selling other people's products and earning a commission basically online. There are some really big businesses out there that have built around affiliate marketing. Some people listening to this probably are aware of NerdWallet. It's a big site that you go to sometimes to find out who has the best credit card offer or something like that. And NerdWallet is basically a giant affiliate site. So I started talking about the success that I was having with that and ended up creating an online course around affiliate marketing. Once I had created that course, I moved on, created another course and built on the success each time until I had several courses out there about various aspects of building an online business. And on top of that, I realized that I wanted to layer on not just take it and do what you want with it sort of courses, but also I wanted to layer on some coaching and some community. And that's where the idea for Fizzle came about. Basically, take all of these courses, offer them as a package for one low monthly price, and then also show up every week, talk to people directly, find out how they're doing, give them some advice, help them find direction. And I've been doing that since 2012 now in the form of Fizzle, along with a podcast that we started back then that's up to 370 something episodes now.
Corbett, one thing I wanted to ask. So, you built this audience first, right? And then the time comes to ask them, hey, I'm building something. I want you to pay for it, right? So many people get stuck at that hurdle. And I think it was probably mitigated because of the audience you were speaking to. These are people who had read Tim Ferriss and are thinking about entrepreneurship. So maybe a little bit easier for you, but I'm sure you've coached thousands of people in that situation, that first time they're looking to ask for money. Like, how do you advise people to get over that mental hurdle? Like, are there strategies? What do you tell them?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, one is a lot of times it's actually more in the entrepreneur's mind than it is in the consumer's mind that people are going to be like annoyed because you're selling something for the first time. Also, I find that it can be really helpful to ease into things by either just having some free consultations with people or by offering some sort of services. If you're going to build an online course, it's really easy to leave things out that are important to the students. And so by offering services and working with people one-on-one, you really start to understand all the questions that they have so that you can bake that into your product. So start with services. You can even offer a couple of them for free to begin with. As I said, I wrote an ebook and offered that for free and saw that that was very successful. So then I took the next step and built an online course that was for sale. And the first time I launched it, I actually offered a big discount in exchange for feedback from people and let them know that eventually the price is going to be, XYZ. So there are ways to kind of ease into it, get your feet wet, and find out if people are really interested in the thing that you're creating.
Yeah, this is great, Corbett. And I can just tell you, just from what Brad and I have personally observed, both in our own business and in those of our friends and the many people that we've interviewed, this is what it looks like. And it doesn't have to be scary. You don't have to bankrupt yourself. You don't need VC. You don't need anybody to give you permission. You can just get started. And I think those best practices, I just want to just say on the side to kind of highlight everything you said. I agree with 100% of it. There's not a single thing that you said that I disagree with, that my perspective is different from yours. And I say, no, he's wrong. Like, in fact, it's more or less what we've done. It's what we observe. It holds true, and it's more true now than ever. And I hope people listening to this will just get started. I mean, I think entrepreneurship for I don't know if everybody needs to become an entrepreneur. I don't know if probably if you look at any point in time, there's probably less than 7% of the country that's going to be entrepreneurs at any given point in human. Like we're not going to ever be in a place where 100% of people are or need to be entrepreneurs. But I do think that 100% of everyone out there, everyone needs to think like an entrepreneur, because it opens up so many possibilities. And this is what the thought process looks like. So, Corbett, people are listening to this. They kind of love the story that you shared. They want to find out more about some of the courses that you've bundled together and about the podcast and the culture and the community that you've created. What is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, two things. If you love podcasts, you can check out the Fizzle Show. You can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts. And you can also head over to our website, fizzle.co. We have tons and tons of free articles there. We've written a blog for, coming up on 10 years. So check that out at fizzle.co.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on the show today. This has been fantastic.
Awesome. You guys are true professionals, and can't wait to hear this in its final form.
Yeah, Jonathan, Corbett's story was incredible, right? This is living the FI life before you've gotten to that technical FI number. That's what the entrepreneur's life can truly be, right? You find that minimum viable income, you find a life that you want to live into, right? He designed this life with his wife, and that was right on the heels of what would have been a disaster, right? This VC-backed dream that he had, it failed. But he failed forward. And that is what this entire journey is all about. That is what FI is about. You can design that life that you want to live into. And I mean, Corbett is the prototypical example.
And I love that you highlighted when he was talking about failure there, because he failed big, right? I mean, from 2005 to 2009, at the end of 2009, he did not feel like a success. He had been steady state, he had survived, and he had the confidence to go into the next thing. But at that point, he was not in 2009 saying, I have made it. So for him to be able to draw on that experience, though, and still, from his perspective now, say, failure is not something to be avoided, or don't try because you might fail. No, it is quite literally part of the process. Without failure, you won't be able to iterate your idea into something that will work. You won't be able to build on the failure. There's no possible way that you can get to where you want to get without some form of failure. And then the key is, all right, we're going to fail, but how can we fail small? How can we fail forward? That's what it looks like to do it with this eye on financial independence, this eye on understanding the value proposition, the understanding the numbers. And he talks about it through the lens of your minimum viable income. You don't want to have a runaway train for expenses. You want to know how much your life actually costs. What do you actually value? What sort of income level do you want to maintain? So, I mean, when we get individuals on and I'm listening to them, as I'm listening to them, I'm thinking, and I can tell you're thinking it too, this guy has something to teach, and I would love to, I could learn more from him, right? And I trust what he's talking about, and he has put out a body of work that I think stands for itself. So to our audience, it'd be well worth your time to go check out their show, The Fizzle Show. You can find it on your podcast player of choice. Definitely check it out. And if you're maybe listening to this episode for the first time, because this idea of financial independence, what would it look like for me to get to the point where working is optional? Not to have the next IPO, not to be the next unicorn, not to have this home run, but just to get to the point where if I'm working, it's based on my choice. It's based on freedom. It's based on autonomy, mastery, purpose. What would it look like to get that in my life? Then check out our show, right? Go back through our archives or go to ChooseFI.com/start. We've put all the resources there for you to make it very easy for you to get started on your path to financial independence today. All right, my friends, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
Click.